Jabba the Hutt was the kingpin of one of the most powerful crime empires that the galaxy has ever known. Before his untimely death at the hands of Princess Leia, he had established the Deciligic clan as the most powerful amongst the Hutt Khajiitics, positioning himself as its ruthless leader. Jabba the Hutt's main criminal operations included spice dealing, slave trading, assassination contracts, extortion, and piracy. When he died, he left a massive vacuum in the Outer Rim's criminal underworld. So what exactly happened to Jabba's massive criminal empire after his untimely demise? The answer depends on whether you favor the current canon or the Legends continuities. In this video, I'm going to take you through every outcome from both timelines. Let's get started with the fate of Jabba's empire according to the current canon. In short, there are two main storylines to focus on. The first is how Boba Fett took control of Jabba's operations on Tatooine. Meanwhile, the second will be familiar to fans who watch The Mandalorian and Grogu. We know from inside the worlds of Star Wars trilogy that Jabba established his criminal empire on Tatooine inside an old Bomar monastery. During the Clone Wars, Jabba brought Hutt power and prestige to levels they hadn't experienced since the days of the ancient Hutt Empire. In the Clone Wars movie, the Republic negotiated with the Hutts to access key hyperspace lanes in return for rescuing Jabba's son, Rotta. This inadvertently solidified Hutt space as a political entity in its own right. Later, during the Galactic Civil War, Emperor Palpatine made a deal with Jabba to secure raw materials for Imperial military production. Palpatine enabled Jabba's criminal empire to survive an Imperial crackdown in the Outer Rim. There's no doubt that the Hutt was one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy before his death. However, Jabba's empire immediately fractured after his untimely demise for several reasons. Firstly, several key members of his entourage either fell into the Great Pit of Carkoon or died when Luke Skywalker and Han Solo blew up his sail barge. One of the key survivors was Jabba's ruthless Twi'lek majordomo, Bib Fortuna. According to the Book of Boba Fett, Fortuna returned to Jabba's palace where he immediately took control of operations. But he lacked Jabba's gravitas and sheer financial muscle. Let me quote directly from the brutal droid AD-8 in Chapter 3 of the Book of Boba Fett. He said, after the sail barge disaster, there was a power vacuum. Bib Fortuna assumed Jabba's mantle. Under Master Bib's watchful eye, Mos Espa was divided amongst three families. The Trandoshans took the city center, the Aqualish, the workers' district here, and the Klatooinians, the starport and upper sprawl. Master Bib did not have the power of Jabba, so he relied on uneasy alliances to preserve his tribute and title. All of this while lining the pockets of Mayor Mok Shaiz. Now, at this point, it's important to remember we're talking about Jabba's domestic operations on Tatooine, not his galactic enterprises. One of the aspects that fans found confusing about The Mandalorian and Grogu was that the Hutts, known as the Twins, were fighting over Jabba's criminal empire. Some fans thought that this made no sense because we just watched a TV series where Boba Fett took control of it. However, Boba only became daimyo of his own Gatra on Tatooine and didn't automatically gain control of Jabba's external business interests. Well, the General has been making additions to his collection for several years now, and if you're anything like me, you've probably imagined what it could be like to own a saber yourself. So that's why I started my own store called Stickman Sabers, with a singular goal in mind. Make sabers that look amazing, being inspired by iconic designs but specifically built to actually duel with. No worrying about babying them, just pick them up and go ham. They're equipped with state-of-the-art pixel technology, giving off an incredibly bright light that will light up the darkest rooms out there. And obviously have that iconic hum, just feels right the moment you switch it on. And for a limited time, if you pick a collector's saber up, you'll also get 2 combat sabers for free. So, if you ever thought about starting your own collection, this is a pretty good place to start. Links in the description, and now, let's get back to the video. We are running a promotion on these selected sabers inspired by these designs in our store. So, use the code to get your discount now on our collector sabers. Let's go back to Bib Fortuna for a moment because he's one of Star Wars' most repulsive characters. According to the Star Wars Character Encyclopedia, before working for Jabba, he became wealthy from selling his fellow Twi'leks into slavery. Eventually, he entered Jabba's service and obtained a Rancor for the Hutt's birthday. In Tales from Jabba's Palace, we read how he competed against the Corellian smuggler Bidlo Querv for the job of Majordomo. Bib wheedled his way into the position by simple fact that he spoke Huttese. while Quirv became the first victim of Jabba's Rancor, Patissa. This story had been retconned into canon, as we know from Star Wars Complete Locations. Fortuna was extremely ambitious and plotted Jabba's assassination before the Hutt crime lord's actual death at the hands of Princess Leia. In The Mandalorian, we see that he survived the explosion and gained control of Jabba's palace, becoming a crime lord in his own right. He also ballooned in weight after living a life of excess, vice, and sheer idolatry. We don't know much about his time as a crime lord other than that several factions left Jabba's syndicate. Finally, Boba Fett showed up at the palace with Fennec Shand, killing Fortuna's guards and releasing an enslaved companion. Fortuna greeted Fett, saying he believed that the bounty hunter had died, and that he had heard many rumors about him. Fett's immediate response was to shoot the Twi'lek crime lord dead. I should note that Fortuna suffers a dramatically different fate in Legends. We know from Bib Fortuna's tale in the anthology Tales from Jabba's Palace that he survived the skiff explosion. Then he returned to Jabba's palace where he fought a small battle for control of the Hutt's possessions. However, the mysterious Bomar monks who inhabited the cellars of the palace removed Fortuna's brain from his body and implanted it in a spider droid walker, as they themselves used. Years later, he was able to manipulate the wounded Twi'lek Firith Olen into entering the palace. Fortuna convinced the monks to place his brain in Olen's body. Then, with the resources he embezzled from Jabba over the years, he set about rebuilding the Hutt's criminal empire and allied with the whipped crime boss, Lady Valyrian. I'll talk a lot more about her much later. Still, for now, it's enough to say that the Essential Guide to Characters reveals that Fortuna and Valyrian agreed on an alliance to exploit the chaos of the Yuuzhan Vong War. Fans of the Book of Boba Fett and The Mandalorian will recall how everybody's favorite bounty hunter became Tatooine's main crime boss with the aid of Fennec Shand. He walked into Jabba's palace, shot Bib Fortuna, and sat in his chair. However, it obviously wasn't that simple for him. Boba faced several challenges to his rule. The first came from Mok Shaiz, the Ithorian mayor of Mos Espa, who refused to pay tribute to Fett. Shand wanted to shoot his majordomo to send a message to the city, but Fett offered him mercy. However, a second and more powerful threat came from the twins, a pair of ruthless Hutts from Jabba's Deciligic clan. The twins resided on the Hutt homeworld of Nal Hutta and hired the Wookiee bounty hunter Black Krrsantan as their bodyguard. He traveled with a massive entourage and declared their ownership of Mos Espa. Fett warned them they would have to kill him to take control of his territory. The twins reluctantly accepted the status quo for the moment, but they'd be back. They sent Black Krrsantan to assassinate Fett when he was healing from his Sarlacc acid burns in his Bacta tank. Fett was able to trap Krrsantan in the Rancor pit beneath Jabba's throne room with the help of the Mods, a street gang he hired for added muscle. Then the twins returned to apologize to Boba for sending the ruthless Wookiee after him. They discovered that Mayor Mok Shaiz had promised Mos Espa to the Pykes Syndicate and decided that this dusty, worthless rock wasn't worth fighting a war over. After all, Jabba's palace may have been on Tatooine, but that was only a tiny percentage of his business entities. Fett offered them the return of Black Krrsantan, but they basically told him to keep him. Eventually, he released the Wookiee and advised him against working for the Hutts again. They also gave him a baby Rancor who immediately imprinted on Fett as the first human that he saw. Fett, Shand, and the Mods then set off for Mos Espa to confront the mayor's majordomo. After confronting him, the majordomo admitted that Mok Shaiz was working for the Pykes. Who exactly are the Pykes? Also known as the Syndicate, they were spice traffickers within the Spice Cartel operating from their homeworld of Obadiah. According to the former Republic Supreme Chancellor Finis Valorum, they had almost complete control over the production of raw spice in the galaxy. They were responsible for ensuring the flow of spice from Kessel to Coruscant, using smugglers and freight captains to ensure consistent deliveries. We see from the Clone Wars and the Book of Boba Fett that they were heavily armed with their own private army. Pike Syndicate foot soldiers used a range of weapons from CC-240 blaster pistols to heavy blaster rifles and electrostaves. The Syndicate also employed mercenaries from outside of the Pike species, who of course worked for credits rather than any sense of loyalty to the Pike cause. For a time, they were one of the 5 crime syndicates that became a part of Darth Maul's Shadow Collective. The Pykes assassinated Jedi Master Sifo Dyas at the behest of Count Dooku. They also had a long and bitter rivalry with the Hutts. During the Clone Wars, they assisted Maul and the Mandalorian Death Watch in attacking Gardulla the Hutt's palace and eventually forcing the Hutts to submit to Maul's leadership. By 5 ABY, after the death of Jabba, the Pykes became increasingly influential on Tatooine. They exploited the power vacuum on the planet because they obviously didn't respect Bib Fortuna. Their syndicate ran a repulsor train through the Dune Sea to transport spice across the planet. The Pykes terrorized a Tusken tribe who lived in close proximity to the route, dismissing them as simple raiders. However, the bad news for the Pykes was that Boba Fett had come to join the Tusken Raiders as a member of their tribe. He forced them to respect the Dune Sea as Tusken Raider territory. The Pykes respond by massacring the tribe and framing the Kenton Striders, another gang. All of this increased the tensions between Boba Fett's new organization and the Pike Syndicate, culminating in a massive battle on the streets of Mos Espa. First, Fett attempted to convince Mos Espa's ruling families to stay neutral while he fought the Pykes. Then he hired Din Djarin, his fellow Mandalorian, to give him extra firepower in the coming battle. He also offered Black Krrsantan a job that the Wookiee accepted. Matters escalated when the Pike Syndicate sent the notorious Duro bounty hunter Cad Bane to negotiate on their behalf. Bane was Fett's former mentor, whom he hadn't seen in decades, but this definitely wasn't a happy reunion. The Aqualish, Klatooinian, and Trandoshan crime families who ruled Mos Espa turned on Fett despite their promise to stay out of the fight. In Chapter 7 of the Book of Boba Fett, we see how Fett, Shand, and Din Djarin unleashed a devastating assault against the Pykes. However, eventually their enemies' overwhelming firepower forced them back, and defeat appeared inevitable. Fett received unexpected reinforcements from the people of Freetown, and the tide began to turn. But then everything escalated again when the Pykes unleashed a pair of Scorpionic Annihilator droids. Basically, these were giant droidekas with powerful deflector shields that were resistant to energy weapons. All seemed lost until Boba rocked up on a Rancor that used its brute strength to destroy both of the Scorpionics in style. The battle still wasn't over because Cad Bane used his flamethrower to scare the Rancor into fleeing. Finally, Fett faced his mentor in an epic showdown, stabbing the Duro bandit through the chest. It was the end of one of the galaxy's most notorious bounty hunters, and a legacy that began before the Clone Wars. Meanwhile, the victory solidified Fett's control of Mos Espa, as he became the most powerful player on Tatooine. That's as far as this story goes in canon. Before switching to talking about Jabba's external criminal empire and the events we see in The Mandalorian and Grogu, I want to briefly describe Fett's adventures in Legends because they're totally different. In short, the only similarity is that he survives being eaten by the Sarlacc before killing the beast from the inside. Instead of becoming the daimyo of a criminal cartel, he would eventually become Mandalore, ascending to the leadership of the Mandalorian Protectors, and ending his career as a bounty hunter. Fett and his Mandalorians helped the New Republic against the Yuuzhan Vong as he became a genuine galactic player. Later, he would train Jaina Solo, helping her to bring down her brother, who had become the Sith Lord Darth Caedus during the Second Galactic Civil War. Some fans dislike his storyline in the current canon because it diminishes his achievements in Legends. Instead of being a mere local gang lord, he becomes the leader of one of the most celebrated and notorious warrior cultures in the entire galaxy. Which Boba Fett storyline do you prefer? Tell me in the comments below. The next aspect of canon I want to discuss will mostly draw from the events of The Mandalorian and Grogu. But before this, I want to set the scene for the Hutts on Tatooine. The planet drew the Hutts for strategic criminal reasons because it was under-policed and sat on valuable smuggling and trade routes. This made it the ideal nexus point for black market trade, bounty hunting, spice trafficking, slavery, and all the dubious enterprises the Hutts involved themselves in. The Hutts were notorious for their Khajiitic system, which prevented them from engaging in civil war but authorized assassinations, underhanded dealings, and undermining each other's business enterprises. Jabba's main rival on Tatooine for a long period in canon was Gardulla the Elder. She was a member of the rival Basadi clan and regularly sparred with Jabba for supremacy. In the Legends novel Darksaber, Durga was also a member of the Basadi clan and had a justifiable hatred for Jabba's line. We know from The Phantom Menace that Gardulla was the former owner of Shmi and Anakin Skywalker before she lost them in a bet to Watto, the scrap dealer. During the Clone Wars, she actually served Jabba on Nal Hutta as his representative on the Council of Elders before going her own way again. We see in the Legacy of Vader series that Gardulla would fall victim to Kylo Ren after he sought revenge for enslaving his grandfather. However, she would continue being a major player on Tatooine until her untimely death. In The Mandalorian and Grogu, the Hutt brother and sister known as the Twins planned to take over Jabba's empire, but there was one big problem. Jabba's son Rotta was still in the picture and was the natural rightful heir to the throne. According to the Essential Guide to Alien Species, Hutts are hermaphrodites, possessing both male and female reproductive organs. Typically, they assume male or female gender roles. Huttlings are relatively rare as they bear their young one at a time. We see in the Clone Wars movie how enraged Jabba was after the Separatists and Zero the Hutt organized his son Rotta's kidnapping. This wasn't purely out of sentiment because Hutts are notoriously callous. Jabba saw Rotta as a crucial business asset because he would eventually inherit his criminal empire. Succeeding him as its leader, being a Huttlet wasn't safe. In Book 3 of A.C. Crispin's Han Solo trilogy, Jabba's aunt Jiliak Desilagic Tiron died in a brutal battle with Durga the Hutt, as he avenged the death of his father Aruk. Jiliak's death left Jabba as the undisputed leader of the Desilagic Khajiitic. When he saw Jiliak's Huttlet squirming from its dead mother's brood pouch, he ruthlessly squashed it as an afterthought because he didn't want to leave any loose ends. I should note that this only occurs in legends, but it's consistent with the devious and frequently lethal scheming that Hutts were capable of, even against their closest family members. That's why it's perfectly viable for the twins to go after Rotta. We don't know their names except that they earned their reputations as a duo on Nal Hutta. They were Jabba's cousins and gained prestige on the Hutt's adopted homeworld, assuming leadership of the cartel's dealings after Jabba's demise. In 11 ABY, they decided to eliminate Rotta, Jabba's sole surviving legitimate heir. However, Rotta decided that he didn't want anything to do with his father's legacy and desired to create his own journey. Many fans have an issue with this because it's entirely inconsistent with thousands of years of Hutt history. Hutts crave power and control. Even when Hutts are on the right side of history, like the former Republic's Supreme Chancellor Blotus, they still assert themselves into roles of extreme influence. Anyway, during this journey of self-discovery, the Hutt equivalent of a gap year, Rotta accrued a debt to the Imperial warlord Janu Coin. He held Rotta captive on the planet Chakari, where he forced him to compete in gladiatorial games. However, Rotta unexpectedly discovered that he loved being in the spotlight and became an iconic celebrity on the planet. Unfortunately for Rotta, Coin planned to kill him during what was supposed to be the last match of his debt. The twins struck a deal with the bounty hunter Din Djarin to locate Rotta as they pretended to rescue him. Djarin was working for the New Republic, who were trying to locate Coin. The government tried to create a working relationship with the twins and the Hutts on Nal Hutta, but didn't realize they were being played. Next, the twins fed information to Coin's Imperial remnant so that he would kill Rotta. Djarin and Grogu attempted to convince Rotta to come with them, but the vain Hutt refused. Then they tried to buy his freedom, but Coin revealed his plan for Rotta's demise. Djarin and Grogu helped Rotta escape from an arena flooded with monsters. However, eventually the twins intercept and capture both Djarin and Rotta with the aid of the bounty hunter Embo. This ends extremely badly for the twins because Djarin escapes and ultimately battles his way through their castle before dropping them in their own dragon snake pit. Rotta also fell into the water, but Grogu used the Force to save him from an early demise. The bounty hunter, Embo, also escaped through a tunnel after opting not to save the twins from being eaten. This left Rotta as the undisputed leader of the Hutt cartel, and he agreed to work with the New Republic. That's as much as we know right now because the Hutts don't play any role in the sequel trilogy. There's no clarification over whether the First Order took revenge on Rotta for working with the New Republic. All we know about Kylo Ren's assassination of Gardulla, but of course that was personal. Next up, I'm going to talk about one of Jabba's longest-serving rivals, the Wifid crime boss, Lady Valyrian. According to the in-canon Star Wars Alien Archive, she became his main rival on Tatooine. We don't get much information about her in the current continuity apart from the fact that she ordered her lover, Jakeel, to infiltrate Jabba's palace to spy on her behalf. The character encyclopedia says that she put a bounty on Jakeel after Jabba's death because he hadn't been the one to kill the Hutt gangster. Jakeel's solution was to join the Bomar Order, which meant becoming a walking brain on robot legs. If we turn to legend sources such as Tales from Jabba's Palace and Secrets from Tatooine, we can get a clearer picture of Lady Valyrian's scheming against Jabba. She arrived on the desert world in the early days of the Empire when she was in her early 20s. Valyrian was born into a life of crime and decided to strike out on her own after her parents were arrested for some heinous actions on their homeworld, Tula. Valyrian purchased the Lucky Despot in Mos Eisley, and this was an old cargo hauler refitted as a hotel and casino. However, she quickly learned that Tatooine already had a dominant crime lord in Jabba. This began a rivalry that lasted as long as the Hutt's life. Jabba's forces raided the Lucky Despot several times, with massive tensions between the duo. Eventually, Lady Valyrian agreed to pay off Jabba to cease his attacks. In return, he allowed her to operate the Lucky Despot, as long as she didn't allow her operations to grow too big. He also warned her in case of any Imperial law enforcement raids for illegal gambling, which surprisingly did occur on Tatooine. Despite their public truce, Lady Valyrian and Jabba remain toxic rivals. It's just such a shame we don't get to see her in any visual Star Wars media because she's such a great character. Over time, she built a palace in the spaceport city of Mos Espa and gradually established outposts across Tatooine. She inserted spies into Jabba's palace while the Hutt crime lord tasked the security chief, Effin Mon, to take her down. One of my favorite details comes from the short story We Don't Do Weddings in Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina. It reveals that Valyrian was so petty that she hired Jabba's favorite band, the Modal Nodes, to play at her wedding because she knew it would annoy him. However, the ruthless Valyrian became enraged during the celebration when she discovered that her spouse Dewap had disappeared during the festivities to hunt for Han Solo. He had learnt about the bounty Jabba placed on the smuggler and was keen to prove himself on his new planet. An incensed Valyrian killed him during a brawl as a squad of Imperial stormtroopers came to raid the Lucky Despot in search of illegal gamblers. She sought revenge against Jabba for failing to tell her as per their agreement. Oh, and she had Dewap's body shipped back to Tula in tiny pieces. We know from Star Wars Galaxies and Empire Divided that Lady Valyrian decided to assassinate Jabba in one ABY. She hired a crack team of off-world specialists, but the cunning Hutt got wind of the plan. Instead, he arranged the killings of her death squad and took out her bodyguard Tyrok. Later, she took another lover, the Wifid Jakil, and pretended to have a furious breakup so she could insert him in Jabba's lair. In Tales from Jabba's Palace, Jakil attempted to poison the Hutt, but was otherwise basically useless. She also tried to lure Effin Mon to her side, but he refused despite enjoying Valyrian's company. The Wifid crime boss did hire Sy Snoodles from the Max Rebo band, but Sly eventually told Jabba about Valyrian's offer. Shortly before Jabba's death, Malakili, his Rancor keeper, approached Valyrian with the offer of spying for her in return for helping to liberate his beloved pet. Valyrian agreed because she thought it would be hilarious to see Jabba's reaction and even had cameras secretly inserted in his throne room. Unfortunately for Malakili, Luke Skywalker killed the beast before they could make their escape. Soon after, Jabba and many of his entourage would die on his sail barge in the Dune Sea. Valyrian wasted no time in taking advantage of the situation. Secrets of Tatooine explains that she quickly took over many of his operations. She already had a reputation for being a much more reasonable employer than the Hutt, although it was previously easier to get wealthy working for Jabba. After Jabba's death, Valyrian used the veneer of benevolence to gain loyalty, as she richly rewarded those who were successful for her. However, the nature of crime in the Outer Rim evolved after the Hutt's death with an exodus from Tatooine. Many of Jabba's former clients joined Talon Karrde's network. Meanwhile, others traveled to Nal Hutta and Nar Shaddaa to work for the Hutts directly. Eventually, Lady Valyrian became the only major player on Tatooine, completely taking over Jabba's interests on the planet. After the rise of the New Republic, she gained further power and influence. Secrets of Tatooine explains that Lady Valyrian made huge fortunes selling water, power, land, and shipping rights to the New Republic. She also received a seat on the city council of Tatooine's capital, Mos Espa. However, it wasn't all rosy for Valyrian. She was aware that many of Jabba's Hutt relatives had an interest in returning to the planet. Valyrian avoided several assassination plots and became increasingly paranoid, turning her home into a fortress. Eventually, she found a protege, a Twi'lek female called Shiriani, who became homeless after Jabba's death. Initially, Valyrian had hired her as a dancer in the Lucky Despot, but the Twi'lek impressed her with a quick grasp of business and ambition. She gradually entrusted Shiriani with more responsibility with a view to her becoming Valyrian's eventual successor. Eventually, Valyrian even gave Shiriani her own casino and hotel in Mos Espa. Unfortunately, our old Bib Fortuna would re-emerge in the body of the young Twi'lek male, Firith Olen, and turn Shiriani against Valyrian. Shiriani began plotting how to usurp her old mentor, instead of waiting patiently to inherit the Wifid's criminal empire. Meanwhile, the pressure began intensifying for Lady Valyrian with the rise of Durga the Hutt in Mos Espa. He became a serious rival for her, and the duo began an underground gang war. Try as she might, Valyrian couldn't avoid galactic affairs in her corner of the galaxy. The Yuuzhan Vong War began in 25 ABY with catastrophic results for billions of beings. Although the Yuuzhan Vong never landed on Tatooine, they did have an indirect effect on Lady Valyrian's operations. Firstly, she tried exploiting the chaos alongside Shiriani and Bib Fortuna. But then increasing numbers of Hutts began fleeing to Tatooine after the ruination of their homeworld, Nal Hutta, during the war. Soon, Valyrian faced more competition than she ever had in her life. It was a catastrophic result for her, but that's where the timeline of this fascinating story ends. Jabba rose to prominence as the most powerful Hutt throughout his lifetime. We see in canon that he dominated the Hutt Grand Council throughout the Clone Wars before his fellow members met a gruesome fate. Canon actually does a better job of developing this aspect of Hutt society than Legends. However, we do know which Hutt emerged as the most powerful for a period after Jabba's death. I've already mentioned Durga the Hutt because he killed Jabba's Aunt Jilliak in a brutal one-on-one contest, to avenge the death of his father Aruk. Durga's loyalty to his father was by no means misplaced. In the Hutt Gambit, we learn that Aruk's superstitious entourage urged him to kill his offspring after he was born with a disfiguring birthmark above his eye. However, Aruk refused because he believed that Durga would one day become a great Hutt. He wasn't wrong, because Durga eventually established himself as a serious threat to the New Republic, even if he didn't last for very long. Let's begin with Durga's rise to power and how he was able to take advantage of Jabba's death for his own gains. Durga wasn't just a member of Clan Basadi, he also became a Vigo in the notorious Black Sun Syndicate after seeking aid from its leader, Prince Xizor. It's important to understand that this was initially a major frustration for Durga. Hutts are extremely clan-oriented, and it would be a huge sign of weakness to serve another being's criminal organization. We see in canon how Jabba and his fellow Hutt cartel members initially refused to work with Darth Maul until he left them with no choice. However, Durga rose to prominence in Black Sun as the head of a vast criminal network that mostly focused on dealings with other Hutts and Klatooinians. Outwardly, Durga appeared extremely loyal to Prince Xizor and the Black Sun. However, several of his fellow Vigos justifiably wondered if his loyalty was really to the Hutt Khajiitics. The Shadows of the Empire sourcebook explains that Durga secretly attempted to manipulate his fellow lieutenants against Xizor as he attempted to consolidate power. Prince Xizor was fully aware that there was a plot against him and executed Durga's co-conspirator, Vigo Green, in 3.5 ABY, to send a message to his enemies. Eventually, Durga found himself in a unique position after the deaths of Jabba the Hutt and Prince Xizor in quick succession. Suddenly, two of the largest criminal syndicates in the galaxy were rudderless. Durga took control of many of Black Sun's assets, massively increasing his financial wealth. The death of Jabba also left the Deciligic clan in disarray, opening the door for Durga and the Basadi Khajiitic to capitalize as the dominant family on Nal Hutta. Durga always had an interest in slavery and gun running, but he became increasingly interested in military R&R. In Kevin J. Anderson's novel Darksaber, Durga allied with the false Imperial General Sulamar to build a superweapon. The Darksaber was basically a Death Star super laser without the gigantic moon-sized padding. The engineer Bevel Lemelisk, the original designer of the Death Star in Legends, adjusted the plans to Durga's wishes. It was still a space station, but on a much leaner scale, with only the super laser encased inside a cylindrical Durasteel shell that resembled a Jedi lightsaber. Durga intended it to become a home for hundreds of Hutts and their entourages. On paper, it would be more powerful, more maneuverable, and much more economical than either of the Death Stars. However, the Darksaber project was beset with difficulties. Firstly, Sulamar was a total fraud, and he supplied Durga with outdated computer cores. The Hutt also depended on the hive-minded Tauriel species to assemble the project. However, they were easily distracted, which meant there were many mistakes throughout the construction process. Durga was a cheapskate too, which didn't help matters. Lemelisk began to increasingly lose faith in the project and plotted escape. Eventually, the New Republic learned of Durga's plot and took it very seriously. They sent an ill-fated infiltration team under General Crix Madine to sabotage the project. Unfortunately, two of Madine's team were killed on their approach. Durga's forces captured Madine and executed him on the bridge of the Darksaber. A New Republic fleet under General Wedge Antilles came to intercept the Darksaber. Fully convinced that the Darksaber was operational, Durga commanded it to be flown into an asteroid field to escape. Faced by two gigantic asteroids blocking their path, Durga ordered the space station to fire its super laser. However, the weapon didn't work, and the asteroids crushed the Darksaber, ending Durga's reign as the most powerful Hutt in the galaxy. As an aside, Bevel Lemelisk had already fled the space station because he didn't believe it would work. Wedge Antilles' forces captured him, and the New Republic eventually executed him after a trial for his war crimes. The final figure I want to discuss is Talon Karrde, because he became one of the key players in the galactic underworld after Jabba's death. Karrde is one of the best characters in Legends and first appears in Timothy Zahn's Thrawn trilogy. He began his criminal career in the employ of Gorge Cardass, the leader of a smuggling and information brokering gang. Karrde was an exceptional operator and built up relationships with many fellow smugglers throughout his career, including Booster Tarek, Lando Calrissian, and Samuel Tomas Gillespie, amongst many others. He rose through the ranks of Cardass's organization and succeeded him after his disappearance in 0BBY. The new Essential Guide to Characters reveals that Karrde had a ruthless side. He took control of the organization in a single night and suppressed several attempts by Cardass's other lieutenants to usurp him. Eventually, he established total control over the organization. While his group wasn't on the scale of Jabba's Syndicate or the Black Sun, they were a large and well-respected organization. Karrde was also extremely pragmatic and deliberately kept a low profile, hiding his true power. In Heir to the Empire, Han Solo is surprised to learn that Karrde's organization may be the most powerful smuggling operation in the galaxy at that time. He maintained strict political neutrality during the Galactic Civil War, unlike Black Sun or Jabba, who aided the Empire at various points. Despite trying to play both sides, Karrde found himself on the Empire's most wanted list after selling information about Imperial movements to the Rebel Alliance. The bounty hunter Zuckuss tried and failed to collect it. Karrde also had run-ins with the Hutts, most notoriously undercutting Shalera on Corellia. Karrde became known for his loyalty to his underlings and became particularly popular to work for because of this. He was one of the first criminals to learn of Jabba's death and subsequently Luke Skywalker's defeat of Emperor Palpatine. Star Wars Gamer 2 explains that he looked upon this with gloom because he foresaw the return of the Jedi Order. Karrde thought that a new government would clamp down on criminal activity in the Outer Rim and curtail his profit margin. Karrde saw Jabba's death as the perfect opportunity to expand his organization into a larger syndicate. We know from the Thrawn trilogy that he built a secret facility on Myrkr, a distant forest world with force-repelling Ysalamari and sensor-confusing flora. The new Essential Guide to Characters reveals that he hired several of Jabba's former loyalists, including Melina Karnis, a member of the Hutt security team. However, Karrde didn't tolerate disloyalty and betrayal. He ruthlessly had her killed when she betrayed him. Two of his key personnel acquisitions were the services of the Slicer, Zacharish Gint, and the former Emperor's Hand, Mara Jade. Star Wars Gamer 2 says that Karrde had over 800 individuals and 24 ships under his command by 9 ABY. He became an unwilling major player during Grand Admiral Thrawn's campaign against the New Republic. Initially, he ingratiated himself with the Chiss Imperial commander after his forces landed on Myrkr to gather Ysalamari. However, he inadvertently captured Luke Skywalker after Mara Jade brought Karrde's freighter, the Wild Karrde, out of hyperspace, close to the Jedi's stricken X-Wing. Circumstances evolved after Skywalker and Karrde found themselves on Thrawn's hit list. His organization fled Myrkr for Rishi, and he offered the Republic the location of the legendary Katana fleet, which he had secretly located years earlier. However, the Empire interfered with his plans when they captured Mara Jade, who was now Karrde's second in command. She offered up the location of the Katana fleet in return for Karrde's amnesty. Karrde became increasingly involved with the New Republic after he discovered that Thrawn was using clone troops. He began searching for the source of the clones and made a deal with Luke Skywalker to sell his information to the New Republic. Perhaps the most crucial step that Karrde took was his establishment of the Smugglers Alliance. This was a network of the galaxy's most notorious smugglers, including Dravis, Brask, Mannix, and the notorious ship thief Niles Ferrier. During a meeting at the Whistler's Whirlpool on Trogan, Karrde advocated allying against the Empire because they were bad for business. Most of the smugglers weren't buying this idea until an Imperial raid changed their tune. Karrde's smuggler coalition played a crucial role in the remaining war against Thrawn. They discovered that Thrawn had anticipated the New Republic's attack against Bilbringi. Karrde led the Smugglers Alliance into battle alongside Rogue Squadron against the Imperial forces. This war changed the landscape for smugglers and criminality in the galaxy. It also gave Karrde new credibility as a figure that every smuggler respected. Over the following decades, Karrde's organization went from strength to strength, although they were always sympathetic to the New Republic and the new Jedi Order. In 19 ABY, during the events of Timothy Zahn's Hand of Thrawn duology, Karrde found his old boss Gorge Cardass and helped end a nightmarish political crisis. His information exposed the truth about the returned Grand Admiral Thrawn, and he transformed his organization into an information-sharing agency to ensure trust between the New Republic and the Imperial Remnant. During the Yuuzhan Vong War, he didn't stay on the sidelines like Lady Valyrian and Bib Fortuna, looking to exploit the situation. Instead, he reformed the Smugglers' Alliance and fought alongside the New Republic against this extragalactic threat. Finally, after the Galactic Federation of Free Alliances declared the Jedi Order their enemy, Karrde allied with the Jedi because of his loyalty to Luke Skywalker and his wife, Mara Jade Skywalker. If you love Legends Star Wars, there's no doubt that you love Talon Karrde because he's one of the greatest characters in the entire franchise. He was a more than worthy successor to Jabba as the most significant criminal in the galaxy, even if he became something more honorable than that, and even flirted with legitimacy. Who was your favorite galactic criminal? Let me know in the comments what you'd like me to talk about next.